This company has been producing luxury cars for the elite all its life, and it's hard to imagine that in addition to the rich, one of their cars appealed to the military. It was clad in armor and equipped with a machine gun, Maxim. This manufacturer in the mid-20th century classified the power of its cars. In the column Power, it was written adequate, and they presented it as a special brand feature. Why do you aristocrats need to know the power of your car? Today, aircraft, rocket, and marine engines, power turbines, and other industrial equipment are produced. As many as 60% of the cars produced in the history of the brand are still on the road. Today, we will talk about a car brand that has a double name. Now, there are a lot of car brands with a double name, but unlike Mercedes-Benz, Alfa Romeo, or Aston Martin, it's named exactly after the two founders of its brand. People, by the way, that are absolutely unlike each other. This is Rolls Royce. From this video, you will learn: why did the man who dreamed to produce airplanes give preference to the car? How did the union of two very different people create the dream of millions? How did one of the founders get killed by a passion for airplanes? What did Rolls Royce and Ford have in common? Rolls Royce, the success story. How many biographies of automobile founders do you have to read to realize that they're all a little nuts? Pretty much all of them. All of the people who have made real significant contributions to automobiles don't look like much of a normal person, judging by their childhood biographies. Well, Rolls is exactly the same. He's in front of you now, by the way. Handsome, every girl's dream. Charles Rolls was born on August 27, 1877 in London to a wealthy family, a family of barons. He was their first son, and by the way, he was loved at first. It was only later, when he showed his infatuation, that the love disappeared. Why did it disappear? Because the barons of that time were different from today. They weren't allowed to do the dirty work. And isn't that just what our hero was like? Despite his dirty hobbies, he was educated and, most importantly, intelligent. We mean he could look far into the future. So, when he was studying at Eton College, he already understood that the future was behind cars. Cars already existed, and although they were inferior to carriages in popularity, they were more functional. Now, we've skipped a couple of moments in Rolls' life that are of no interest, but let's say that he was far from stupid and he was good at the exact sciences. In short, he received a brilliant education studying at Cambridge. Beginning in 1898, Rolls got a job and tried his hand at business. He managed to be on a steam yacht and on the railroad as well. Now, he was not much of an engineer, he knew that himself, and he quickly gave up such positions, starting his own business with the money his father sent him in 1903. It was one of Britain's first car dealerships, C.S. Rolls and Company, where Rolls sold Peugeot and Minerva. Remember this moment. This was biography of Rolls in detachment from Royce. We saw a very important detail. Rolls knew how to sell. This was the first reason for Rolls-Royce's dizzying success both at the start and thereafter. The principles laid down by Rolls would be actual for the company for a long time. Now to the sweet stuff. Rolls met Henry Royce in 1904. The meeting turned out to be fateful, and they were destined to work together until 1910. We are going to talk about that now, so we will not touch on Royce's biography during this period. Instead, we'll tell you about what happened to him before and what happened after his collaboration with Rolls. Royce was impressed with Rolls' entrepreneurial ability, and the other with the two-cylinder Royce 10. All cool, all hands on deck. On December 23, 1904, Rolls signed an agreement to take all Royce cars. That's when the name was coined, Rolls-Royce. Rolls-Royce went to great lengths to make their cars smooth and quiet, and then, using Rolls' talent, were able to promote their inventions in the United States and win awards for reliable cars. True, in 1909, Rolls lost interest in cars. It sounds unexpected if you remember that for the sake of this hobby, he sacrificed his reputation throughout his life, but the fact remains. He got interested in airplanes, and even suggested that Royce start making them. Royce was not interested in airplanes. Rolls accepted his friend's decision, but retreated into the background, becoming a non-executive director of the company. By the way, Royce would later return to an idea that he didn't like at first. It was the fascination with airplanes that would later ruin Rolls. In 1910, in July, in Bournemouth, the British seaside resort town, there were festivities to celebrate the town's centennial. The highlight of the two-week program were two events, of which we are interested in only one: flights by the continent's best aviators. Charles Rolls was already among them. And now, the big time. July 12, 1910. The audience was set up for excitement, Rolls for success, the weather for murder. Rolls received several warnings of danger from his colleagues, but he ignored them. Had he been more prudent, he might have listened. The planes were flimsy, and so his plane fell apart after the second attempt at takeoff. The first was successful, but Rolls was not satisfied with the result. In the end, the plane crashed, fell 20 meters, Rolls was under a pile of rubble, and dead. It is notable that he was the first Briton to die in a plane crash. That was the biography of Rolls. Now let's talk about a man who turned out to be just as important, if not more so, to the company than Charles Rolls. To understand the reason for the company's success, you have to understand the ideas it promoted. To do this, we need to study the biography of its founders and find out what they wanted to say through the brand. If we've told you enough about Rolls, we're just starting to talk about Royce. This grandfather in front of you is Henry Royce. You can tell by looking at him that he is a businessman, mature, strong millionaire, and a big boss. Look at that confident smile. It did not come easily. Such a fate is hard to envy. He was born March 27, 1863 in a poor family and was the youngest child. His father was the breadwinner, but first failed, so the family moved to London. And then he died when Royce was 9 years old. His mother did not work. Royce only formally went to school for a year, after which he went to work as a newspaper seller and telegram carrier so that he could at least have food. Thank goodness Royce was not satisfied with that. In 1884, he got together with his friend Ernest Claremont. Royce had no cash, Claremont had a couple times that amount, but the total was small. With the money they had, they were able to start a company called F.H. Royce and Company and manufactured electrical fixtures, electric generators, and electric cranes. And in 1899, the company was renamed Royce Ltd. And then he realized that the cars were the future. And he made a car, his own. It worked out. In 1904, it happened. The very same car he provided the Rolls for inspection, and Rolls liked it all. This fateful moment should be clearly noted because this is how the history of Rolls-Royce began. In 1906, as mentioned, they formalized the partnership, and Rolls was a great match for Royce. One had a keen mind and the ability to sell and run a business, and the other had a real talent for engineering. This symbiosis lasted until the death of Rolls and was quite successful. True, we lied when we called Royce the most talented engineer. The board of directors disagreed, but acknowledged that Royce was a brilliant designer. Royce remained at the helm of the company, though his health suffered after Rolls' death, and he moved to the south of France. He underwent surgery and miraculously survived, but could no longer be present at production himself. That's how the company was born. Whatever comes next is already history. We would say if it were not for another man who was called the hyphen in Rolls-Royce. Before you now is Claude Johnson, a brilliant engineer and businessman without whom Rolls-Royce would hardly have been successful. Without him, it would have been impossible to answer the basic question in the video. Let's take a closer look at him. He contributed almost more to the company than both Rolls and Royce combined, after all. Little is known about Johnson's childhood. He was born on October 24, 1864, into a very ordinary family. He was given a cute characteristic, broad-shouldered extrovert. He was from childhood an active, sociable, and cheerful fellow to whom many things were easy. Johnson was easygoing, enthusiastic, and generally cool. Charles Rolls noticed this too when they met in 1903 and agreed they would make cool cars for their friends. That eventually grew into Rolls-Royce. Isn't that just the sweetest story in the auto industry? The union of these two guys with Royce led to the formation of Rolls-Royce. Charles Rolls was in charge of PR. Johnson also moonlighted in that field, but mostly organized the business so that it just wouldn't collapse, and Royce looked after production. A perfect symbiosis. True, fate saw otherwise and cut Rolls out of the story. Here's what Johnson did to keep the company safe. First, Royce was a tremendous workaholic, and naturally his health took a sharp downturn in 1908. Johnson convinced Royce to work at home as a designer. Second, Johnson was responsible for the fact that the company produced, instead of 4 simple models, 1 top end, which ensured an incredible success at the start and was loved by all. But more about that later. Thirdly, it was he who created the company motto, "We will produce the best cars money can buy." So, nothing less than that. Finally, it was he who led the Rolls-Royce business after the tragic death of Rolls until 1926, when death took him too. Now, here we are talking about everyone who created Rolls-Royce. What led the company to success? There are 3 main reasons. First, the genius of Rolls, who was an excellent PR man. Second, the talent of Royce, who was, after all, not a bad engineer and a great designer. Third, the intelligence and acumen of Johnson, who was a top engineer and manager. Now, the people are left in the background. We are interested in the company. First, Rolls originally approved all models. There were 4 of them, and the last one served as the proto model for their best car of those years. The car that served for it was called the Rolls Royce 30 HP, and it was already pretty good. On its basis, they created the ingenious Rolls Royce 4050, which was firstly their most successful car, and secondly the only car that the company produced at all. A truly aesthetic image indeed. We make one car, but what a car. What car? The perfect best car of its time. It was destined for success, despite the enormous amount of money it cost. Unofficially, it was called the Silver Ghost, and that name stuck with it to this day, and it sold, and only it, until 1926. Bravo. Any other company would have gone bankrupt if it made one expensive car for the whole 20 years. In 1914, World War I started. During wartime, nobody gave a shit about cars, so much that the company stopped making them. They started making aircraft engines at the request of the government. Rolls must have cried from happiness in heaven when he saw it. His dream had finally come true. The motor was called the Rolls Royce Eagle and was just there. Okay, at least it helped. And by the way, it also contributed to the company's success. It became popular in part because it helped the government in the war. In 1922, a new model called 20 appeared. It was notable for the fact that it was a new model, in the company which for 14 years had produced only one model. Wow. It was, by the way, not bad and cheap. It came out because the economy was somewhat ruined after the war. And then came the scary, cool Silver Ghost Phantom, which replaced the Silver Ghost in 1925. But something really big happened to the company in 1931. They didn't just buy it, they gobbled up Bentley and relegated it to the ground, using only its name and reputation. Destroyed all its models by producing in its name Bentley 3.5 liter in those years, which was very closely resembling a Rolls Royce. How did they manage to stay afloat during the Great Depression? Well, that's a tough question. It seems to us that their success before those years ensured that they had enough money and built up a reputation never to go bankrupt, as Bentley did. And given that the company was very wealthy, they were even able to buy out a competitor. That's to the point about how Rolls-Royce rose to the Olympus of success. The purchase helped them a lot. They were making airplane engines again during wartime, and they even had a contract with the government. Maybe that's why their company didn't go under in Britain's estimated economy after the war. They didn't just do any job there, they made top-secret jet engines. Can you imagine how important their work was in an air war with Germany, the most powerful country at that time? We think you can. After the war, Rolls-Royce cars fell by the wayside. Who needed such expensive cars anyway? So Bentley started making engines. This eventually led to its collapse. The company was making diesel engines for, it seems, everything. Then the company was able to buy itself another couple of companies and continued to do that. Anyway, what can you do? Continuous engine production led to them making expensive turbofan engine and going bankrupt. Now that worked out for the government. The company was nationalized and then taken over by BMW. Rolls-Royce succeeded for a reason. It was not a total waste of time, for God's sake. It was helped by circumstances and the high quality of cars. Rolls was a brilliant PR man. Johnson, an excellent businessman and manufacturer, and Royce was an excellent designer. They made a car that was produced for 18 years and kept the company from going under. They were able to buy back the Bentley, which the public adored, and it fed them for a long time. They did everything they could to make the business work, and it stayed afloat until 1971, which is practically 70 years. That's why Rolls-Royce succeeded. At the end of the day, there are no analogs to their cars. They made a big bet on an idea, their own special idea. What was that idea? The idea was produce cars in which the driver would feel most comfortable, safe, and prestigious. So we applaud that story. It is brilliant and impeccable if you don't count the later years and modern times.